My name is Brian Howley. I'm chairperson of Balbriggan and District Historical Society, and I'm delighted, absolutely delighted, to welcome everybody back to the first of our in-person talks here in the Bracken Court Hotel. We are thrilled to know that we are back in action. We've been feverishly doing what we can online and Zoom and so forth. We even had our 40th celebration last year. But it's over 2 years since last we met other than on Zoom. I would like to welcome everybody back, and it's great that everybody is here. Just like to say something to everybody. In line with all of the requirements, there are no requirements to wear masks. However, please everybody be careful and respect other people's decisions. So if somebody wants to sit a little bit apart from everyone else and somebody wants to keep the mask on for the whole duration, that's fine with all of us. As I say, we had our 40th year celebration last year, and you would have seen on the way in some of the photographs there with the committee, with President Higgins brought us in for a thank you and a celebration. So I want to thank all previous members and existing members of the committee for the last 2 years. And particularly I'd like to mention Katrina Quinnigan, as she is actually leaving the locality shortly and has decided to leave as her position of treasurer. And a huge boola boss to Katrina. She's done a lot for herself. We'd like to thank the public for their support and enthusiasm. We've had a lot of positive developments. COVID has been awful, the word positive, but we've had a lot of positive developments. Breamore Castle is coming a little bit more online. Breamore Castle Market, we've had a great presence there and engaged with a lot of the locals and the traditional locals and the new locals. Our Balbriggan, there's a lot of very positive developments happening there as well. You all know that our Society's mission is to promote an interest in local history of the area through lectures, publications and exhibitions, and also to establish a local museum. We're kicking off the series with our very always popular Jim Walsh, who's going to talk to us about the Irish National Foresters Association. And I know we have some members, it's great to see we have some members here who are associated with some of the people down through the years, and indeed with one of the buildings as well. So you've all figured out about the membership and so forth, so I won't go about that. The books and the medals are there for anyone who's interested in that. And just also, I will just mention emails. I know a lot of people, aircom.net and aircom, there was a confusion over emails with people. So a lot of people sort of fell out of the service that we were providing. A lot of it's all on Facebook and Twitter and so forth now. But please talk to us if you want to get the information on an email, and your email may have changed lately. Without further ado, I want to introduce, I always call him Mr. Balbriggan, Jim Walsh. He's going to bring us up to date with the Irish National Foresters Association.
Thank you very much, Brian, for your marvellous and gracious introduction as usual. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure now to present my findings, as they are, on a largely forgotten but very important and thriving one society that existed throughout actually the Western world for well over 100 years. I was just thinking there's an allusion to Juno and the Paycock. Dr. Daly says, "What is the stars?" People often, even recently, say, what is or what were or who were the Irish National Foresters? And looking up my notes recently, I discovered in 2000 I started that search. I can't quite remember why, but I think I know why now, because we were very, very lucky. Rising from our exhibitions, may well remember this, our first exhibition in April '82 in the hotel here, and 2 week-long exhibitions in the Market House. We were in possession of 1 or 2 artefacts, or what you call regalia or memorabilia, relating to the local branch of the Irish National Foresters. So at least we knew we had a local branch, we knew what it was called, we knew what the number was. We had a membership scroll and we had a sash, and 3 large and lovely memorial addresses to various members of the society. So with that, I said, where do you start? Where on earth do you start to find out about such a body? So the first place you always start, of course, the National Library of Ireland in Kildare Street. Couldn't find a screed, not a thing. Only 2 bare items just about to start with. An article in a Dublin journal for 1887. I'll quote for that in a few seconds. And just a chapter in a book on Irish secret societies, which actually gave a chapter on the subject itself. So the next port of call, obviously, was the National Archives in Bishop Street and the former Jacobs factory site. Couldn't find a thing. All day, not a mention of the Irish National Foresters. So that's 2 repositories and hardly anything. I was nearly going to give up, and one very kind person, whose name I've unfortunately forgot, said, "You do realise that the Foresters were a cooperative society, a benefit society?" I said, "Yes, so what?" "Well, the registry of cooperative societies is in Parnell House at 14 Parnell Square. And of course, that takes in, it's a repository of all of the annual returns from the credit unions. So it's like Fort Knox when you make an appointment to go in." And lucky enough, when I arrived in there in 2000, there were files relating, or returns from 1997, relating to 6 branches and 6 only branches in Ireland at that time. Obviously ours was long gone. And the nearest geographically was Navan, so I contacted our secretary, Franklin, she was very helpful. A year later went out and took slides of the members of their band marching in the Patrick's Day Parade. He gave me their contact with a gentleman in Newry who came down here for a day, very, very helpful. The Foresters were very, very active in Northern Ireland. But luckily he also mentioned a young man who had been attending what they call annual conventions throughout the island, meetings of all the various societies. And this man was working on a thesis for Trinity College, and they'd given him a lot of material. In fact, they wanted it back, but that was their problem, not mine. But they gave me his name, John Campbell. It took me months to find him, but eventually I traced him to Ballymun. And one Sunday afternoon, with his permission, I visited the house. He and his wife and 2 children were dressed up in a Fianna, they were prepared to go for a hurling match. But he allowed me to take his thesis out just into the back garden on a chair and take photographs of the title page and illustrations within. And better still, he was able to give me the name of the only official or archivist librarian in the National Archives who knew where the individual files were. A man called Brian Donnelly. Obviously a phone call was necessary. When I went in there next time, Mr. Donnelly had 4 files in front of me. Files relating to our branch and another branch in Balbriggan of which I'd never heard, and the Skerries branch and the Lusk branch. Now all of that will fall into place in the next few moments, so if you bear with me, I'll just read out some of my original notes from 2004. I'd just like to quote Robert Mitchum. He often said, "Never stand if you can sit, and never sit if you can lie down." So I'm sitting at the moment, and I just use my glasses, folks, so bear with me. Now, before we consider the rise of this society, we might consider why friendly or benefit societies were necessary in the first place. In Great Britain and Ireland in the 19th and 18th century, there was no concept of social help for people. In fact, the economic policies prevailing at the time were loosely described as laissez-faire. That's a French term meaning leave alone. One such example in Ireland was the horrendous impact of the Great Hunger of 1845. There was no famine, but there was a hunger. The concept of state benefits to the unemployed, to sick, to widows, orphans simply did not occur. The working class had to wait until the year 1911 when the government of Lloyd George introduced, despite intense opposition in the House of Commons, the very first National Insurance Act for Great Britain and Ireland, involving voluntary contributions from workers. So thus, in the early 19th century, workers and non-workers had no choice but to form their own friendly societies in order to protect their families in time of need. One such society, we're told, was called the Ancient Order of Foresters. Founded circa 1840 in England, apparently they took their inspiration from the chivalrous exploits of legendary outlaws like Robin of Locksley and Ivanhoe. And legends related that these outlaws escaped to the forests and woodlands to escape the clutches of the infamous wealthy robber barons. Now in 1877 was a split. There's always a split, isn't there? I think it was Brennan Behan said the first thing on the agenda is the split. In 1877, that was the 10th anniversary of the failed Fenian uprising. Dissension arose between the Irish branches and the British branches because at this stage there was a desire on the part of Irish members to have some sort of, shall we say, diktat or whatever, to favour nationality. In other words, they were supposed to be apolitical as such, but they wanted sort of to involve some aspect of nationality in their sort of emblem as such. It would also appear that they wish to depart from the arcane and secretive signs and grips expounded by their British counterparts. Therefore, a new society, the Irish National Forestry Society, was formed in that year, embracing the dictum of unity, benevolence and nationality. Now, this society spread like wildfire, and by 1887, 10 years later, P.J. Cullen, not the P.J. Cullen that we knew and loved so well, P.J. Cullen, author of an article on the subject which appeared in the Dublin Journal on the 1st September 1887, said, and I quote, "The order consists of over 100 branches with a membership of over 8,000. Now this is for the whole island, north, east, south and west." Paddy Halpin, a founder member of Skerry's Historical Society, in 1965 delivered a very, very excellent paper to the Society on the subject. And he said, and I quote, "In the year 1894, the order had in its register 18,000 members, comprising some 220 branches and accumulated funds of 21,000. It has to be said, at times the membership in the early days of the Society was viewed with great suspicion by the British establishment, as evidenced by the following description printed in a book called The Secret Societies of Ireland by Captain H.B.C. Pollard. Quote, "The Society is generally held to be moderately non-political and respectable, but there is no doubt that some members who hold office in the Society use the Society as a cover for criminal societies with which they are personally connected." End of quote. They were particularly, I suppose, afraid or fearful that the members would be infiltrated by the IRB. Now, membership did decline throughout Ireland following the establishment of Irish independence in 1922 and the introduction of later social welfare legislation. Now, as I said, when I went into Parnell House in 2000, the 6 branches that were represented there in files were the Dean Cogan branch in Navan, the Con of the 100 Battles branch in Tullamore, the Neil Moore branch in Killybegs, St Finbar branch in Monkstown, County Cork, the Tom Moore branch in Wexford, and the Carlow branch. And as of this week actually, there's only one such branch now existing in the Republic, still active, and it's the Con of the 100 Battles in Tullamore. Now, very, very briefly, some of the facts that I was able to glean then from my second visit to the National Archives in relation to our particular branch. And our branch was dedicated to St Molaga of Bremore. It was called Branch St Molaga. It was number 315, which means there were 314 branches already formed before that. It was established here in Balbriggan on the 14th of May 1897 and registered on the 2nd of March the following year. The earliest records I could find for St Molaga's branch were for the year 1912. The trustees were listed as Richard Gosson of Chapel Street, John Carvin of Hampton Street, and Patrick Clinch on Common Lane. The officer in receipt of money was Andrew Wherity of Drogheda Street. The audit was conducted by Stephen Martin and Thomas Clark, carpenter and van driver. I believe Stephen Martin was the very first chief ranger of our branch, and the Clark family were very involved. They lived in Hampton Street for a number of years. The registered offices at the time were at the Band Rooms, Balbriggan. Now, actually, Stephen Martin carried out the audit himself some months later, in October, actually, 1913. Now, would you believe the membership in 1912 was 111 male members? Just show the interest in it, because population would have been, what, 3,500 max. The total income for the year was £252 and counting. Sums included headings for sickness, death, widows and orphans benefits, as well as a sum for distress relief, etc., etc. It gave actually figures that were dispensed that particular year. £82, £6 or shillings and £4 paid out in sickness, paid to 23 members, etc. A management fund included sums of £13 paid to the secretary and also the treasurer. Rent of the band room was £1, 6 shillings and no pence. It would appear that the very first trustees appointed on the 27th of November 1897 were John Reynolds of Chapel Street, a carpenter, and Matthew O'Neill of Chapel Street, a painter, and also John Hammond of Chapel Street. Matthew O'Neill of Chapel Street, mentioned him. Patrick Corrie served as very first secretary. As we know, the Corrie family for years were painters. I think Louis Corrie is the last family member I remember well. Now, the rules for this particular branch were encapsulated in a book that published in 1914, and it's worthy of just mentioning one or two facts, give an idea of how they operated. Quote, the branch shall for its object have the raising of money by contributions of its members, entrance fees and donations. First, paying a weekly allowance to members when bodily sick and therefore unable to follow their employment. Second, for the decent burial of members and their lawful married wives. Third, for supplying surgical and medical attendance. Another sentence I think is worthy of mention, quote, no political or sectarian debates shall be allowed under a penalty of 1 shilling for each offence, and nor shall secret signs, grips or passwords be used or allowed. Now, the rules of admission. No person must be admitted under the age of 16 or over the age of 40, which I find slightly strange, but perhaps, I mean, we wouldn't have been let in. We wouldn't have been let in. A person was proposed and seconded by 2 members upon payment of a shilling. No candidate could be admitted without a doctor's certificate. Right? No person be admitted if he was of unsound health or of bad character or led a dissolute life. No chance whatsoever. We'd never been admitted. Each new member would usually be presented with 4 items: a contributions book, membership scroll, book of local rules and national rules. Contribution fees were as follows: 6p per week for those aged between 16 and 25, rising to 7p and halfpenny for those aged between 35 and 40. Now, the branch rules and decorum are defined as thus. Despite the split in 1877, the Irish branch is still held on to the names of the various officers. The most important person in each branch was called the Chief Ranger. And at each meeting, he served as a president, and he also preserved order. His second in command was called a sub-chief ranger. A wood warden was a man who was expected to visit the sick members twice a week. A beadle, B-E-A-D-L-E, was to attend the poor and also to prevent the admission of any inebriated persons. Other elected officers were secretary, treasurer and 3 trustees. The duty of the honorary surgeon was thus described, quote, it shall be his duty to examine and to give certificates for candidates and report to the branch, visit sick members, their wives and family or relatives, residing within 3 miles of the branch hall. That must have been their franchise. The branch officially dissolved on the 28th of July 1939. Well, it took almost 4 years and a lot of correspondence between the General Registry and Oak Solicitor Jerry McGowan before the requisite form was filled in. And so you know then the building was bought then by Dan O'Shea in 1947, of whom we have some mention later. Now, I mentioned a second file that was on the table in front of me for Balbriggan. Now, there was 7 or 8 years of Balbriggan, but obviously I just had time to transcribe one set of notes. You had to use a pencil and type it up. But the second file I opened it, and to much my amazement, we actually had a female branch in Balbriggan, of which nobody ever mentioned. And it was called the Molly-Bawn branch, M-O-L-L-I-E-B-A-W-N branch. And this branch was established in Balbriggan on the 7th of June 1912 and registered on the 17th of December. The National Archives held returns for this branch for 1940 and 1920 only. So I'm just going to actually quote details from 1914. The trustees were Kate Smith of Hampton Street, Margaret Gosson of Clonard Street and Bridget Clark of Hampton Street. The treasurer was Ellen Hughes of Clonard Street. The audit was conducted by Miss Mary Smith and Miss B. Hammond, and the registered office was the Foresters' Hall. So while they had their own name, they were obviously operating under the auspices of the Foresters and could use the hall. Now, the membership in 1914, 75. So obviously it was in people's interest to join. But something strange happened in 1914, and we might debate sometime to that after our talk and slideshow. Because in the same year, 52 members left the female branch, leaving only 23 members at the end of the year. But I think the year 1914 is relevant. We might discuss that later. They left, they had an income of £25, expenditure of 13, and May will be interested to know that they actually had post office savings of £18 May in 1914. So the membership dropped from 1914, 23 to eventually 1920. So I have no record as to when they were dissolved as such. So I was wondering, what on earth did it mean by Molly-Bawn? What does that mean? Was it somebody famous called Molly-Bawn? And lucky enough for me, about a year later, I happened to pick up an article in the Dublin Historical Record. And the reason I chose to read it was because the article had a most unusual title, and it's called 5618. 5618 and all that, stroke, the Jewish Cemetery, Fairview Strand. The reason I chose to read that, because in the late 70s, or late 60s, early 70s, I lived in Clontarf and I worked in Dublin City Libraries, and I regularly cycled past that cemetery but never entered it. So I read it in full, and luckily for me, on the second last page, I came across the following statement by Dermot Heine, the author of the article. Quote, "What the ordinary Dublin person associates with the Jews is the pawn shop, or the Molly Bon, as it is known colloquially." There was and is a common conception that most pawn shops were operated by Jews, and not so at all. I'd like to think that the female members of Balbriggan, seeing the success of the male members, thought, they said to their friends, "Join our branch and you won't have to use the pawn shop. You won't have to go to the Molly Bon." I'd like to think that was the reason. But it's an interesting story. Recently I was wondering, those ladies in particular, they might have been their late teens, early 20s, perhaps 30s when they were in 1940 and when they were working in the factories, and possibly their great-grandchildren are still alive in Balbriggan and may not be aware of their membership. But very little has passed down, as I said, unfortunately, apart from one slash and one inscription, or a membership inscription that we'll have a slide of later on. And finally, just the last part of this, I just thought I'd mention it. I'm indebted to Joe Curtis. Joe is very sort of generous to us over the years, and he inherited the following article in the Drogheda Independent, Saturday, August the 1st, 1903, page 3. Article entitled, "The New Banner of the Irish National Foresters Balbriggan, with historical notes of St. Molaga." Now, the article was signed by a journalist called C.J.L., and he or she stated the following: "The beautiful banner, painted by Mr. Samuel Watson, is one of the handsomest and best finished I've ever seen. The banner is 9 feet 6 inches high by 7 feet 6 inches wide. On the front is painted 2 life-size figures of Irish National Foresters in full regalia. They are represented in the act of drawing aside a rich purple curtain and disclosing to view the central subject of St. Molaga. In the upper part is painted a medallion portrait of Robert Emmet. Twinning across the top is a ribbon with the inscription, quote, 'Stand together, brothers all.' In gold letters, and the bottom a ribbon bearing the words, quote, 'We give help in time of need.' One of the things that they did when they seceded in 1877 in Ireland, they decided to adopt a costume in the style of Robert Emmet, and that's what you see on the banners. Yes, just finally, Joseph Hutchinson is the figure. 2 people are mentioned in articles or books written about the foresters. In 1877, when they had the first meeting in Bolton Street, a man called Joseph O. Henry came up with the new rules, and Joseph Hutchinson is the man who's given most credit for spreading the word. He was secretary for many years of the overall society, and at each convention he would read out a report, and he served as Lord Mayor of Dublin twice. But in 1920, the annual convention was held in Enniscorthy from the 2nd to the 4th of August, and this 1920, there were 196 branches in Ireland, 97 in England, 134 in Scotland, 1 in Wales, 124 in US of A, 110 in Australia, 3 in Africa, total of 680 branches. That was even in 1920. So maybe double that for the previous 50 years. And why only 1 branch in Wales? I think it's because the same happened in librarianship. The Welsh miners were always very active in looking after themselves. They were the first to have circulating libraries and health systems of their own. And perhaps it's no coincidence that a Welshman in Erin and Bevan in 1948 brought in the National Health Service. So now we're going to show 50 slides, if that's okay, folks. Yeah, the first image, folks, is it's just the frontage of the branch, the Dean Cogan branch in Navan. It's not particularly aesthetic looking, etc. But one year I went out anyway to take slides, and unfortunately, when in the front door, somebody had tried to break in that night, and there was a gaping hole in the ceiling. But it didn't stop the members from participating in the parade, so we'll be looking at them as we go along. Thank you. Now, I think a lot of the images I took that particular day when I visited John Campbell in his house in Ballymun. So I would have just put something on a chair or something and taken a slide of it as best I could. Now that is actually the junior section of the Irish National Foresters. So at some stage, juveniles were admitted. Now that looks to be a much more an older what do you call it, sash, because it's actually it's the ancient order of foresters, and that's the Forest Society I made reference to. And if you can see, their diktat is slightly different. It's unity, benevolence, and what's the third word, folks?
Concord.
Yeah, no mention of nationality. Now SB would be the initials of the sub chief ranger, I think. Yeah. And then it would have been a much more modern Irish National Foresters. And the Chief Ranger was the main man, really. That was what he wore at meetings. Yeah, no, I mean, they audited everything. They had annual reports. That's just an example of their half-yearly report, etc., for 1910. And their main offices were then at 28 Bachelor's Walk. Thank you. Now, this is an example of a membership. Now, couldn't find any from Balbriggan, but you can see this is Joseph Hutchinson is the secretary, the general secretary up on top there. And it's the Captain Mackey branch number 395. We were there before them. Passage West. And the district, it's actually held in the, I think it's a CYMS hall in Passage West. And the member is Jeremiah Murphy, age 43, by trade a boilermaker. And he won, etc., etc. He joined on 1st of June 1923.
He joined before he was 40, obviously, yeah. Is that it?
Yeah, I was doing the maths in my head as well. Well done. I've kept that one for Martin Fanning. Martin, I'll give that to you at the end of the night and you can fill that in.
Oh, yeah.
That's just a little thing that they signed, obviously. There's no mention of the branch, unfortunately. It's James McAllister, I think. And it's a sick note, if you like. I call it a sick note because it's a letter from the branch surgeon of whatever branch it is, saying that James McAllister has been suffering from, and your guess is as good as mine, it could be pneumonia or whatever. It's the date is the 24th of May 1917. Pity that the branch isn't represented as well. Yeah. Now this is an example. That was one page in John Campbell's book, and I just had to train my camera and get 4 in the frame. So in fact, underneath the screen you can actually see a caption telling us where they were. So on the top were banners of the Dean Charles Russell of Killowen branch for Lurgan. I think it was number 240. That's on top. Now he's in his judicial robes. The branches named their branches after saints, prelates, politicians, poets, you name it. And on the top left then is the other side of the banner. And somewhat unusual, I think, because it is Northern Ireland, but it depicts almost a comely maiden in white and red. And she has sort of a green banner and a harp, and then she has on one side is actually an adoring wolfhound, and then you've got the high cross and the round tower. But you notice that the harp is in blue, and if you go to Stormont or you go to Dáil Éireann, the official colour of Ireland is not green; it's blue, and that's why the seats in both Houses of Parliament are actually blue. Yeah. Now down here in the bottom here we have the Dean Cogan banner, and this has obviously been borne aloft in the first ones are obviously in display somewhere in Northern Ireland in the field. But this has been held aloft, and Dean Cogan, and then on the left-hand side you can see something very similar to the description I read out of our new banner in 1903. On the other side, you've got a sick member sitting in a chair, being met by possibly the wood warden, who's bearing a basket of fruit, good man himself, and he's in the Robert Emmet costume as such. Yeah, these are other branches there now. Can you make out what they are? The John Mitchell branches from Newry, and yeah, AJ McKenna. Didn't have time to check that up. I think it's Belfast. You see, there were up maybe 600 altogether in the island. Now, Every year, somewhere in the British Isles, there would be a convention or a convocation. Could be Glasgow, could be Dublin, it could be Belfast. But the chief rangers from every society went and often rode down on horseback of the town with all of their memorabilia. It was a fine sight. There are photographs available. I mean, it was, some people thought it was a little bit over the top. But that's the kind of thing that, now, going back to our banner, we no longer have a banner. And maybe this might be the appropriate time, because I've never said this in public before. Now that we know exactly what the new banner looked like, its very dimensions of what was on it, would it be too much to think that maybe the committee might think of approaching, say, art students in the local schools who might put together? We exactly have the exact dimensions. They were made from poplin, I believe, some similar materials. So we know what the motif was. We'd have to come up with something of St. Molaga and the bees. But it would be a nice maybe project for a future. Yeah. We could discuss that again, because we have the description, and it would replace the original flag. The Chief Ranger, of course, had his own ceremony book, General Secretary, etc. These are sort of just the various accounts of their activities. Thank you. There you go again. That's 1889. Okay. Yeah, that's obviously the facade of the original branch, the Bridge of Athlone branch, number 430, and obviously restored in 1987. I have never seen it. I've never passed by it. Yeah, that's just the front cover of John Campbell's thesis for Trinity College. For any societies in Ireland, 1850, 1960, particular reference, AOH and Irish National Foresters. It wasn't published, but it was a great work of research as such. Now, this is the morning I travelled out to Navan. You see, the foresters had sort of social activities as well, you know, over the years, etc., etc. But this is what they were doing in Navan back in 2000. They were obviously trying to keep people involved. Thank you. Yeah, now this is, shall we say, the emblem on top of their banner. And you can see it depicts possibly the original, the Foresters' Hall, the street in Navan, and then the various yeah, thank you. And this is the actually, that's not 350, is day 350. Is that the back of their banner? Could be. Huh? Yeah, very good, yeah. And you can see now that's what we could do with a banner. We know that sort of how they were designed, etc. So the poor and unfortunate is sick, but well looked after. So now they start on their march, and this is exactly the size of the banner now when it's held, you know, aloft by the members and their with their sashes, etc. I tried to find out about Dean Cogan. You could spend all your life finding out about the people after whom the branches were founded. Sometimes there'd be local priests involved with the land war or something like that. There's the sashes that each member would get then, and they'd wear them on St. Patrick's Day and perhaps also Corpus Christi processions as well. There you are, the two lads proud, getting ready to parade. They hadn't lifted a banner yet. Oh, these were taken, I think, between 2000 and 2004. Can't quite put a specific year on it. Yeah. Now they also have a ladies' branch in Navan. Now I think it's primarily a ladies' band as such, but they have their own banners, etc., etc. And they're setting off with their sashes, and very proud of the tradition. There they go again. Now, so I wonder, is that 9'7" by whatever? Were they all exactly the same size? And you have the Navan, Irish National Foresters band as well. Young and old, their own uniform as well. And there they go marching down the town. Now this is an example of, I've no idea, I haven't got a caption for this, But it just shows in time gone by, they marched down the street. This might have been part of a local convention or a national convention. I'm not sure whether it was Northern Ireland or not. But here you have these guys parading in the costume of their branch, etc., etc. So I began an allusion to Sean O'Casey, but there's another play that May will know all about, or thespians here will know about, and it's the one devoted to the Plough and the Stars. And in the first act there's a character called Uncle Peter Flynn, and he's the uncle of Norah Clitheroe. But he's ridiculed by a character called Young Covey because he's dressing up to go to a meeting in the livery of the Foresters. Yeah. And he's sort of a figure of fun. And that was first produced in the Abbey, I think, in 1927, sort of 10 years after the Rising. So by that stage, in some quarters, they might have been seen, like when compared against the Irish Citizen Army or as the Irish Volunteers, as a little bit out of date at very least. Yeah. Now, we come to one of three illustrated addresses, we like to call them, in our possession. We've actually hit this one on display here tonight. And this was donated, actually bequeathed in her will by Phyllis Penny, who was the daughter of Dr. Fulham. And am I correct, was she the first female town commissioner in the history of the commissioners?
I can't ever recall her being on.
Well, no, because I didn't, but that was put to me some years ago and I can't correct it. I know you were the first female Cathaoirleach. But now, this was actually bequeathed in her will, courtesy of our good friend Pauline Corcoran, who served for many years as her treasurer. And we had it on display for over 10 or 12 years in the library on the square before we had to take everything out in 2005. And it's now in Ardgillan Castle with the rest of our archives. But the two Brians and I were up there last Thursday morning. We brought it down just to show it to you. But I didn't realise I actually had a slide of the wording. Brian, you have a very good, strong voice. Would you like to read out the text there?
I will always say, of course, Jim, waiting in Ardgillan, waiting for our museum to come along, yeah, for display in our museum, as all our artefacts are. It says, Dear Dr. Fulham, we, the members of St. Molaga Club, desire to place on record our indebtedness to you for the valuable assistance you wholeheartedly extended to us on all occasions since the formation of our club 14 years ago. Your straightforwardness and warm solicitude for the welfare of our members have taught us to cherish you very dearly for your staunch, kindly friendliness, as well as to secure our confidence in you as our president, and we earnestly hope that you may live many years to look upon this humble souvenir as a tribute of affection, forming a fond tie between you and the members of our club. Signed on behalf of the members, Nicholas J. Heaney, Vice President, James Gosson, Secretary, Christopher McComb, Treasurer, Bernard White, George McGovern, John Hammond, Thomas Clark, Michael Clark, William McMahon, Francis Larkin, Edmund Burke, and James Donnelly. And it's dated the 21st of November 1928.
Very good. So as we can see that Dr. Fulham served for a good few years as the honorary surgeon as such. Little note about some of the names there. Christy McComb used to be the postman in Balbriggan. Is that the same Christopher McComb in 1928?
I would imagine he's earlier than that. He would have, well, if he's supposed to be under 40, it could have been.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. The two clerks there I mentioned again, they lived in Hampton Street. Remember years ago there was a lady called Maura Clark living in Balbriggan. Yeah. She walked around in a large caftan and she used to produce the Gayborn Radio Hour. Maura Clark, she was direct descendant of the Clarks at the time.
That was Eileen.
Was Eileen at the same family? All right, okay, yeah. And Willie McMahon, is that the Willie McMahon that survived World War I?
Yes, I would say so, yeah.
Yeah. Edmund Burke obviously wasn't the famous Edmund Burke, but Bernard White would have been, not sure what White was, etc. George McGovern, of course, was the father of Micheál McGovern. And George worked in as Deeds Temple and Son, but he lost his job when it was burnt down in 1920. And 3 years later, he got the job as librarian in Balbriggan. He replaced James Landy, And George McGovern served as librarian from 1923 to 1936. And when he died, and his wife died within 5 or 6 weeks of each other. And after that, his brother Jimmy got the job for a while, etc. That's George McGovern. So,
Is there a picture of the doctor on top of it?
yeah. And actually, that's why we have it here as well, and the hall as well, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. There he is. Reading my mind.
It's very different because he was in the. Do you remember the photographs we exhibited? Yeah.
I don't ever remember seeing a photograph of him.
Remember the 1892? He's in it. Yeah. Very, very good looking man. Yeah.
That's 1928.
That's 1928, yeah.
So that's 30 years later.
Well, you see, it's 13 years after the building of the hall. And that's the hall itself. Now, for many years, the figure 1913 was on the pediment.
Yeah.
For many years, the figure was on it as such. And he obviously went to Blackrock College. There's Blackrock College on the left, and is associated with the church and the parochial house. Thank you. Now, there are 2 more memorial addresses, and we chose not to bring them down for tonight's presentation. Now, that's much older, and I believe that is Stephen Martin, the first founding member and a chief ranger at the time. I often wonder, he was listed as a carpenter, and I often wonder what Martin family was that, or...
It's the Marquis.
Martin, Stephen Martin.
Oh, Martin.
Yeah.
Oh, not sure.
No, it's not. I wonder, but that's himself now in black and white, with the sash, yeah. And I think that's one of the 2 Clark brothers as well.
Look these guys up in the 1901 census and try and figure out
Yeah,
something we can do.
yeah. Okay, thank you. And that's a venerable 3rd member, so. Now, that house in Molaga's Terrace, that's Willie White. And he told me years ago that his father had been a member, he had a membership scroll. So I called him one day, and that's Willie. Willie only passed away about a year ago. And he is holding, now in fairness, when we see a close-up of it in a few seconds, we won't watch it yet. Unfortunately, it had been severely suffered in damp. And while it's he holding a scroll belonging to his father, John White, it's very difficult to make out the details. But I may, just for the sake of the presentation, say I have a strong familial connection with that door. Because I was born the 11th of March 1948. And 3 or 4 days later, I was carried out of that house, to be baptised in the church by Paddy Blanche and Paddy Jones. Because my mother and father had a room in Willie White's house. And for years, when I was going over to Lurby in the 90s, across what we called the canal, and Paddy Blanche was going to 10 o'clock mass, he'd say, I carried you up Pump Lane with Paddy Jones to be baptised, and I carried you back to Willie White's house. And he says, I wouldn't like to be lifting you now. Get that weight off you, son. And as well as that, Phyllis White went to England and came back, and back to the family home. And she was a regular user of the library. And she came into me in the library one day. She said, you used to sleep in my bedroom. End story. So I'm surprised that there are not more scrolls have survived in Balbriggan. And if we have a quick look at the front of it, unfortunately, I did my best to photograph it, Killian, but it's, thank you. It's been got at, shall we say.
Nice.
Yeah.
There's the Robert Emmet outfits.
Yeah, there you are. Now, of course, would you believe I was speaking to John Woodhead recently? We all know John Woodhead very well. And of course, John Woodhead's grandfather was Willie White's father. And John is called after him. I invited him here tonight, but he's a bit too shy. But, well, oh yeah. Thank you. What, has he previous? Yeah? Thank you. Now, some years ago, I can't quite remember the year, Marion might be able to tell me, but Marion Connolly, kindly brought Pauline O'Hare and I on a little visit around the house, such as it was, in the gardens, and lovely morning. And she also, that's Pauline, she was a great member for years, treasurer, chairperson, etc., and holding up a sash in the back garden as such, relating to the branch, yeah. And there were 2 at that stage. There were 2 stained glass windows resting against the back wall of the garden. That probably were in the front of the building.
That's on the photograph, you can see it.
Yeah. That's a close-up a slide of that, Irish National Foresters, yes. Now this is John Campbell himself. That's the gentleman that visited. He was very, 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 very helpful to me, so I give him great credit for that. Pity his book, maybe or his thesis wasn't published. Thank you. So there were two windows side by side. Yeah. Very, very colourful, aren't they? Yeah. And that's the man himself. Dan was still alive, of course, sitting in the back garden. And it wasn't a formal interview as such, but I had the opportunity to sit down and have a chat with him for a few minutes. And I took a few notes, and Marion helped me this morning over the phone with some other more material. But he told me he was born on the 13th of April, 1913. He was born in the town of Tusist, outside Kenmare. And Marion said it was in the highest mountain possible outside Kenmare. And he actually passed away on the 9th of September 2009 at the grand old age of 96. And he bought the Foresters Hall in 1947. And he ran it as a fee-paying school called St. Brendan's College. We asked her why, because Marion told me that he went to St. Brendan's College in Killarney. Now, people of a certain generation went there. My uncle Declan Walsh, who passed away 2 years ago, at the age of 84, he was a student. Michael Sheridan is still alive.
Yeah,
People
my brother Nicky.
went there as well.
My
Yeah.
husband.
Really?
Yeah.
Jimmy?
Yeah.
Really? And
And they did their evening down in the Lorette Convent.
did they?
Yeah.
And did they ever talk to you about the regime in the school, or yeah?
Yeah, he said Dano was one of the best teachers.
Locally, of course, Dano Shea was called Dano.
Yeah.
And he said he was a great teacher, did he? I heard the same. I went to Delasal from 61 to 66, and we did mechanical drawing. And I got my uncle Declan's books on mechanical drawing. Of course, I can't see a plan from elevation 40 years later. But books were exceptional standards, you know. So if that was the norm in the school, yeah. Now, I believe he finished in 1957 because he got an offer that his wife couldn't refuse. He wanted to stay, but Miss O'Shea wasn't having any of it. Is Marion here?
Yeah.
Marion, would you like to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The priest in Gormstown called in to give him a job
Yeah.
in the college, and he refused it. So we went into MoMA and told her, and she made him go down to the phone as quick as he could and take it up, because there was too much. Like, we were living there, and there was a school upstairs, which I remember, but it was just too much.
Yeah. And is there anything left? No, of the school or the desks or whatever?
He gave all the desks to the convent.
Oh, did he? Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everything to do with the school went to the convent.
Oh.
There was stuff from the foresters in the house when he took it over,
Yeah.
but unfortunately he just got rid of it.
Oh.
Because and probably those flags and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I asked him why, being a history teacher, but you see, he came from very, very poor beginning up in the mountains in Kenmare, and he just lived with what he needed. And he was into history all the time, and even when he retired, he'd get books from the library and write notes on history from the books. So he spent his life reading and books and history, but if anything to do with material stuff, no interest whatsoever,
Yeah.
even if there was history involved.
Yeah.
And that's because he was poor and just lived with what he needed, and that stayed with him all his life, much to my mother's annoyance, like a new carpet the odd time.
Nice to have that story, isn't it, on record? Yeah. Well, actually, I decided this morning only, I discovered I had changed the slide some years ago and put it in a frame of Dan standing with a stick in the back garden. So we decided tonight to present this to Marion as a little offer of thanks for her courtesy. So she'll be receiving this for Brian in a few moments' time. Thank you.
The Girl Guides also met in the house as well.
Yeah, I remember going to a meeting with the Girl Guides.
Did you?
Scouts,
Yeah.
Foresters, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That explains a lot.
And another thing that was done in the Foresters Hall, they played poker.
Well, of course. What Marion didn't say, he was a great card player, wasn't he?
I was played because my father played.
You see, when he started the school in, his brother told him, who was a priest, to cycle to the nearest town where there was no school, and that's what he did. and landed in Balbriggan. So he had the school in the library for a while. And then when he wanted to buy the house, some of the people maybe in the town were a little bit suspicious of a stranger coming in buying a house that was part of the town.
All right.
That maybe he wouldn't stay so long. So he made an awful lot of promises which went into the deeds, that he'd let the girl guides meet there in that far window down below, and every Wednesday and one Sunday a month, and he'd provide them with heat, which he used to light the fire, and water. And then he promised that if he sold the house, he'd sell it to the parish priest. And all this stuff went into the deeds, and it took me years to sort it out. Right into the Irish Girl Guides or the Catholic Girl Guides, they had to send letters. The Archbishop Desmond, wasn't it? He had to write to say he knew of the clauses. He had no interest. It took years to get all the promises he made to the people in the town sorted before I could sell it.
Interesting. Marion, just for the record, kindly for momentarily gave a copy of the indenture to Killian, and we both viewed it last Monday night. And one sentence stood out. I just memorised it for the purpose of this presentation, because I often wondered what was originally on that site. And the indenture said that it was built on the site of a ruined cottage which had belonged to the late Charles Woodhead. So again, there's the Woodhead connection there. I mentioned that to John, okay. So, and then James Lawless died in 1920. He married a Woodhead as well. So, thank you. I just thought, for the purpose of this happened, I had about 5 spaces left. So we formally finished our production on the Foresters. But Brian mentioned it last year, we celebrated our 4th anniversary. I just chose 5 or 6 slides to show you slides of times gone by that I might have taken sort of just serendipity. And that was in High Street one day. These 3 gentlemen, between them, numbered nearly 250 years. Tony McGann on the left, Felix Curran in the middle, and John Foley on the right. But what they were doing was, they were distributing butter. You remember the butter mountain from the dispensary? They were about to go out and dispense, but I just caught them at the right time. I was going back to the library. And I hope it's okay to say this on record, because Johnny Levins, who was also doing it, related this story to my father, that they were delivering butter to the Wiki Dowling up in Hampton Street. And that's where the Hammonds lived, in that row of houses in Hampton Street. And they said, now, whatever you do, Mr. Dowling, make sure to put the butter in the fridge. He said, what do you mean the fridge? The whole house is a fridge, he said. He won't mind the story being told, I'm sure. Do you remember that? I took that a few years ago when the townscape changed, and when there were seats, etc., on the square. And there were 2 men, of course, who were very involved with Dave North over the years. They were retired. Can anybody tell me who they were? And?
Is he Richardson now?
Peter Faulkner. Peter Faulkner, yeah, and Phil Barnett. You know, it's a pity. I think maybe I should be speaking at a place, but I really feel it's a pity that those seats were removed off the park. They could sit there in the sun, whatever, you know. They weren't harming anybody, but so that's a little memento. Yes, thank you.
No free Wi-Fi in those chairs, no.
No. He doesn't know this, but I just happened to come across it. You know, a local character, Desi Grant, of course, and that's in the days when he could climb a ladder. He was working with Tony Coyne and the ski, and since that he fell off the ladder and broke both ankles, can hardly walk, the poor guy. But I'm sure you wouldn't mind being featuring tonight, you know. That's a wonderful evening. Can anybody tell me what the year was? And who the 2 figures in the carriage are? Father Culreevy.
No, it's the Rose
I'll tell you in a second. It was the Brickway Festival. The year was 1984. And it's the square, and Tom Culreevy, Father Culreevy, was involved that year. That was Brenda Hyland, the Rose of Tralee. The Bongarda from Waterford.
The man is Joe Coleman from Skerries.
Well done, May. I knew you knew the answer. Now, what happened was they come up, place was packed. They went up Dublin Street, Market Green, and back down Hampton Street. And this is as they're coming back down onto the square. and that's McGowan's I was sitting up on the pillar on top of the gate with a 200-metre lens, got it perfectly. Sorry?
Yeah.
Pity I didn't see it. But what I did then was, I went across the square a few minutes later, and I got a wonderful slide from across the square. Thank you. And that's, all those men were the far side of the square wondering, where's she gone? Because the carriage had gone up Dublin Street. Is she coming back? So some of them are looking down the square, up. Now on the right you've got Jerry Nixon. Is that Maura Dunn?
Yeah.
Yeah. The girl beside her, isn't that Margaret, yeah? Yeah. Yeah. Then there's a Rooney chap. What's his first name?
Is that not Willie Rooney himself?
No, it's just on the right. Starting from the right, Jerry Nixon, Maura Dunn, Margaret, chap with the red shirt.
Yeah, I know, Maura.
Michael Rooney's son. Bryony Barnett looking straight at me. The Harper man. Sorry? No, it's not Freddie. It's Herbie. It's Herbie, yeah. It's Herbie, yeah. Billy Gilday, Jackie Short, Billy Rooney. Now, who's the man next to Billy Rooney?
Is he Willie Richardson or something?
I don't know, because I thought it was Jemmy Cram, but it's not. And is that Jackie Kelly on the extreme left? Yeah,
That could be Jackie Kelly.
that's Jackie Kelly, yeah. But 1984 was a strange year for us, because that year, Father Colrivi asked the society, every year there was a book. It was just full of ads. And then the ads, the money went in, and it went to the two groups. But we were asked, well, we put a few articles into the 1984. That's why I remember it so well. So Christy Garrett and I got cracking. Now we put in 6 articles, and we did real research. Christy went through the archives of the commissioners, and there were 6 decent articles, and they went into the book without our names. Completely anonymous articles. I kept it because of that, you know, but that's why I remember the year was 1984. And our final slide now. I may well remember this. I came across this. I just thought, seeing as we're looking back, we were formed in 1981, and we had our first exhibition in the hotel in April of 1982. Now I think this is ourselves. We had a cheese and wine reception on the Saturday night, whatever. Now on the left is, I don't know who that is on the left.
That's Jim Walsh.
That's Bernie Carey, Bernie Healy, May herself, and her beloved Pat. Now Don Griffin was senior librarian at the time, and he and I and Pat were in the library, and May was in the post office. And I think it's truthful to say in those days, first port of call, if you want to know anything about Balbriggan, was May in the post office and ourselves in the library. But that's the way it worked. At the bottom left was Pauline Corcoran. She was lovely, yeah.
Ice cream lady.
Yeah, and she was so good. She was a wonderful treasurer, and she often entertained us in her house for our monthly meetings. Lovely lady, you know. And Marion Cran, yeah. Marion Cran. Now, she was a treasurer. So Dom was the first secretary, was the first chairperson, and Marion. Now there are 2 people missing from that committee. May, can you remember?
Tony Casson.
Antonia Casson. And she's still alive. She's 99, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Darren Park, or Cravian Park.
Willie McKenna.
Hoyland McKenna, yeah. Well, basically, folks, I think with that we leave it at that. It was a wonderful evening. I hope you enjoyed it.